The Saga of Job. Faith in the Darkness, Part 1. The man who had everything in the eastern land of Uz, where winds sang ancient tales through the valleys and the stars seemed to burn closer to the earth. There lived a man whose name echoed in the heavenly courts and in the hearts of men. Job was not a king crowned with gold, nor a warrior with a bloodied sword. But his wealth was measured in something more precious than metal, in integrity. 7,000 sheep, white as the snows of distant mountains, bleated in his lush pastures, their wool so fine that merchants from Tyre and Sidon traveled for weeks to trade for it. 3,000 camels formed caravans that crossed deserts, bringing spices from Arabia, silks from the east, and ivory from Africa. 500 yoke of oxen plowed the fertile land that produced barley and wheat in abundance, while 500 donkeys carried treasures that filled storehouses and chambers. Servants as numerous as the leaves on the oaks of Bashan worked joyfully, for their master was just and generous. But Job's true wealth lay within the stone walls of his spacious home, where love dwelt in every corner. 7 sons strong and honorable men and 3 daughters women of beauty and grace formed a family circle that was the envy of Uz. They often gathered for feasts, each in their own home, inviting one another to celebrate the life God had given them. And Job, the patriarch, watched over their souls with a care that transcended the paternal. Every morning, before the first golden ray of sun broke the horizon, Job rose from his bed. His steps led him to the place of sacrifice, where the stone altar waited. There, while the dawn still wrapped the land in its blue-gray mantle, he offered burnt offerings, one for each child. The scent of burning meat rose to the heavens, mixed with his prayer. Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This ritual was not superstition, but the ultimate expression of his reverent fear, recognition that even in abundance, humanity remained fragile, in need of grace. While the smoke of Job's morning sacrifices rose into Uz's tranquil atmosphere, in the inaccessible heights, an event of cosmic consequence unfolded. The sons of God presented themselves before the Eternal, and among them came also Satan, the accuser, whose steps echoed with the sound of unspoken suspicions. "Where have you come from?" asked the Lord, his voice not one of interrogation, but of invitation to the dialogue that has always existed between creator and creature. "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it," replied Satan. "It's eyes. One can speak of eyes for such a being, scanning the shadows and lights of creation, always seeking the crack in the armor of human faith. Have you considered my servant Job?" The Lord continued, and there was a tone of legitimate paternal pride in the words. "There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Satan paused, a calculated silence. His smile was a curvature without warmth, a movement of lips that did not reach whatever passed for his soul. "Does Job fear God for nothing?" His voice was smooth, insinuating, laden with the seemingly irrefutable logic of self-interest. "Have you not put a hedge around him, and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land." He paused again, allowing the premise to settle in the spaces between words. "But now, stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The silence that followed was not one of hesitation, but of unfathomable depth. The angels present perhaps held their breath if celestial beings breathe. Then the voice of the Eternal echoed through the courts, charged with a mystery no cherub or seraph could completely decipher. "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." The permission was given. The test, or perhaps the revelation, would begin. On earth, Job did not know his name had been the center of a celestial dialogue. He supervised his lands, resolved disputes among servants with wisdom, counseled his sons, and at night contemplated the stars, marveling at the God who had hung them in the void. His life was a harmonious balance between work and rest, between prosperity and gratitude, between authority and humility, until the day the balance shattered. First came the messenger, a young servant whose face was disfigured by terror. He ran to where Job was examining a new barley field, practically falling at his feet. The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby. He gasped, and the Sabians attacked and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." Job placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Be calm, my son. Life is more precious than oxen and donkeys." But before he could fully process the loss, another servant arrived, older, his cloak torn in a sign of mourning. "The fire of God fell from the heavens," he cried, his eyes still reflecting the horror of the flames, "and burned up the sheep and the servants and destroyed them. I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." Job felt a chill run down his spine but remained erect. "The Lord gave the sheep," he whispered to himself, "and the Lord." A third messenger interrupted his thought, riding hard from the north. "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties," he announced, his voice trembling, "and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." 3 blows, 3 catastrophic losses. A lifetime's wealth dissipated in hours. Job looked at his surviving servants' men, marked by trauma, and at the fields that once pulsed with activity, now silent as a tomb. He took a deep breath, preparing words of comfort for his men. It was then that he saw the 4th messenger. This one did not run. He dragged himself. His steps were uneven, as if each movement required superhuman effort. When he came near, Job saw that his eyes were empty, not of terror, but of a pain so deep it transcended expression. "Your sons and daughters," the man's voice was a thread of sound, "were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house." Job felt his heart quicken. Terrible premonition tightened his chest. A mighty wind swept in from the desert. The messenger continued, each word uttered as if torn from his soul, and struck the 4 corners of the house. "It collapsed on the young people, and they are dead." He paused, and the silence that followed was more eloquent than any scream. "I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." Job's world collapsed. Not just physically, riches could be rebuilt, but at its very core, his sons, his daughters. The children he had blessed each morning, for whom he had offered sacrifices, whose faces were the light of his days, dead, all of them. He fell to his knees. The hands that had once blessed now rose in a primordial gesture of mourning. He seized his cloak, the fine woolen cloak his daughters had woven for him, and tore it from top to bottom. The sound of the rending fabric echoed like the groan of a broken heart. Then, with mechanical movements, he took a knife and shaved his head. The graying hair that was his crown of dignity fell to the dusty ground, mixing with the ashes he himself threw over his head. Finally, he fell face down to the ground. The dust that had once produced wealth now entered his mouth, mixing with his tears. His servants watched, fearing a collapse, a curse, a revolt against the heavens that had allowed such tragedy. His eyes, red from weeping, fixed on a distant point on the horizon. When he spoke, his voice was not a scream, but a solemn declaration, laden with a faith forged not in prosperity, but in something deeper. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart." He paused, breathing deeply. The air that entered his lungs was the same his children had breathed for the last time. "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away." Another pause. The servants leaned forward, waiting for the logical conclusion, an accusation, a complaint, a doubt. Instead, came words that would echo through the centuries, across cultures and beliefs, becoming an eternal landmark in the history of human faith. "May the name of the Lord be praised." In that prostration, in that tearing of clothes, in that silent homage to the dead, Scripture records simply, "In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing." The first round had ended. Job's faith had remained firm. But in the heavenly wings, the accuser was not satisfied. The test, he would soon argue, had not been deep enough. True integrity, he would suggest, is only revealed when the flesh itself is touched. Meanwhile, in Uz, a man sat among the ashes of his former life, his soul a battlefield between the deepest pain humanity can know and a faith that refused to die. The sun set that day, taking with it not only the light, but an entire world. The night that followed was the longest of Job's life, but it would not be the last. End of part 1. May God bless you. Thank you for getting this far. Subscribe to the channel and receive more videos like this. Part 2. The depths of the abyss, time and ooze, became a different entity for Job. Days no longer flowed. They dragged, each hour heavy as a millstone, each night a dark tomb where the ghosts of his family danced in his dreams. He sat in the ashes of what had been his life, not the literal ashes of his home. For it still stood, empty and echoing silence, but the symbolic ashes of everything he had built. 3 friends, hearing of all the calamities that had come upon him, traveled from their own lands. Eliphaz of Teman, Bildad of Shua, and Zophar of Namath. They arranged to meet together to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. The transformation was so complete, so visceral, that they stopped at a distance, unable to approach immediately. The man they knew, robust, erect, with eyes that smiled before his lips, was unrecognizable. His skin, once tanned by the healthy sun of fieldwork, now had a sickly pallor. His body, once strong as the oaks of Bashan, was shrunken, bent under an invisible weight. And all over his skin, from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head, festering sores grew, exuding a sweet, nauseating odor. With a piece of broken pottery he had found in the ruins of a barn, Job scraped his wounds as he sat among the ashes. His movements mechanical, repetitive, as if by cleansing the body he could cleanse the soul. For 7 days and 7 nights, the 3 friends sat with him in silence. No words seemed adequate. No comfort seemed possible. Job's pain was an unexplored continent, a territory of suffering where common language failed. They were simply present, their silhouettes forming an incomplete circle around the man in ashes. On the 7th day, as the sun began to tinge the horizon a red that resembled blood, Job broke the silence. His words were not the words of gratitude his friends might have expected, nor of serene acceptance. They were a primordial groan, a lament rising from the depths of his wounded humanity. May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, a boy is conceived. His voice was rough from disuse and pain. May that day turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine on it. Eliphaz, the eldest, the wisest in years, furrowed his brow. Bildad looked at the ground, uncomfortable. Woe, Fur pressed his lips together. Job continued, his voice gaining intensity. Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me and breasts that I might be nursed? For now I would be lying down in peace. I would be asleep and at rest with kings and rulers of the earth. His lament continued, a torrent of words that swept away the 7 days of silence. He spoke of the darkness he now preferred, of the grave that seemed more inviting than life, of the rest the dead enjoy while the living suffer. When he finally fell silent, exhausted, the first stars were appearing in the sky, silent witnesses to his pain. Then Eliphaz spoke. His voice was calm, measured, weighted with the wisdom of years. If someone ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? But who can keep from speaking? He paused, choosing his words carefully. Think how you have instructed many, how you have strengthened feeble hands. Your words have supported those who stumbled, who have strengthened faltering knees. His approach was gentle at first, acknowledging Job's past integrity. But then came the core of his argument, the relentless logic that would characterize all the friends' speeches. But now, trouble comes to you, and you are discouraged. It strikes you, and you are dismayed. Should not your piety be your confidence and your blameless ways your hope? Eliphaz presented his view of the moral universe, cause and effect, sowing and reaping. Consider now. Who, being innocent, has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed, as I have observed? Those who plow evil, and those who sow trouble reap it. His logic was irrefutable within its own framework. God is just. Suffering is punishment. Therefore, Job must have sinned. The equation was mathematical in its precision, but it failed to capture the complexity of the human heart and the mysteries of the divine ways. Job replied not with defense, but with deepening. His pain was not just about suffering, but about God's silence. If only my anguish could be weighed and all my misery be placed on the scales, it would surely outweigh the sand of the seas. No wonder my words have been impetuous. He did not deny the possibility of sin. What is mankind that you make so much of them, that you give them so much attention? But he questioned the proportion. His pain seemed greater than any possible guilt. And then, amid the despair, came one of the most paradoxical declarations of faith of all time. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Bildad was next. Psst. Less philosophical than Eliphaz, more direct. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? For him the answer was simple. Job's children sinned. Job must examine himself. Surely God does not reject one who is blameless or strengthen the hands of evildoers. Zophar, the youngest and most impetuous, was the most brutal. Are all these words to go unanswered? Is this talker to be vindicated? His accusation was straightforward. Job was suffering less than he deserved. Yet if you devote your heart to him and stretch out your hands to him, and then free of fault, you will lift up your face. The cycle of speeches continued: accusation, defense, questioning. Job did not bend to the simplistic logic. Instead, he plunged deeper into the mystery. Indeed, I know that this is true. But how can mere mortals prove their innocence before God? He recognized divine transcendence, the infinite distance between creator and creature. If I wanted to argue with him, I could not answer him one time out of 1,000. His wisdom is profound. His power is vast. Who has resisted him and come out unscathed? His suffering became a crucible where superficial faith evaporated, leaving only the indestructible core of a relationship that did not depend on understanding. Job did not claim perfect innocence. Even if I washed myself with soap and my hands with cleansing powder, it would plunge me into a slime pit so that even my clothes would detest me. But he questioned the simplistic logic of suffering as immediate retribution. Amid the debates, a fourth man had arrived silently. Elihu, son of Barachel the Busite, of the family of Ram. Younger than the others, he had remained silent out of respect for their age. But as he listened, his indignation grew. He saw the flaw in both the friend's arguments and in Job's approach. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, he exploded. I am full of words, and the spirit within me compels me. Inside, I am like bottled up wine, like new wineskins ready to burst. Elihu brought a new perspective. A middle ground between the extreme positions. Suffering is discipline, not punishment. God speaking through pain. For God does speak now one way, now another, though no one perceives it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on people as they slumber in their beds, his approach was more sophisticated, suffering as divine pedagogy, a call to repentance and growth. God is mighty, but despises no one. He is mighty and firm in his purpose. He defended God's justice without denying Job's relative innocence, suggesting that perhaps the issue wasn't guilt, but something deeper. But even Elihu, with his youthful eloquence and fresh perspectives, did not have the complete answer. His words were more compassionate, less accusatory, but they were still human words trying to decipher the indecipherable. As the debates dragged on, Job sometimes seemed to reach flashes of profound understanding. At one point, he made a declaration that would echo through the millennia. An affirmation of faith that transcended his immediate suffering. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end, he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh, I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, and not another. Here was something extraordinary. Amid the sores, the losses, the fruitless debates, Job glimpsed an eschatological hope. Not the immediate restoration of his wealth, but a final encounter with God that would justify everything. The friends were left speechless before this declaration. How to respond to a man covered in sores, sitting in ashes, speaking of seeing God in his flesh. Their systematic theologies, their formulas of retribution, their well-intentioned explanations all seemed small before this vision. The day was ending once again. Shadows lengthened over the land of Uz. The four debaters were exhausted, their words spent. Job remained silent now, his eyes fixed on something beyond the visible horizon. The piece of pottery had fallen from his hands, forgotten. The wounds on his body throbbed, but a deeper wound, the wound of why, remained open. It was then that the air changed. Not gradually, but abruptly, as if the very atmosphere had been replaced. A wind began to blow. Not the gentle breeze that refreshes a weary face, but a whirlwind that stirred dust and ashes, forming a rotating column that approached the place where they sat. Eliphaz stood up, alarmed. Bildad stepped back. Zophar tried to speak, but the words died on his lips. Elihu stood still, his eyes wide. Job slowly raised his head, his eyes meeting the approaching storm. From the depths of the whirlwind, a voice spoke. It was not the voice of Eliphaz, with his careful wisdom, nor of Bildad with his direct logic, nor of Zophar with his honest brutality, nor of Elihu with his youthful fervor. It was a voice that made the earth tremble beneath their feet, a voice echoing with the authority of creation itself. Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? The question was not addressed to Job alone, but to all of them. To all who had tried to explain, justify, rationalize the suffering. To all who thought they could decipher the ways of the Most High with human logic, God was about to speak, and his words would not be explanations, but revelations. They would not be answers to questions, but questions that would undo all human answers. The true dialogue was about to begin. End of part 2. Thank you for getting this far. Subscribe to the channel and receive more videos like this. Part 3. The Redeemer's voice and the restoration of the whirlwind was no ordinary meteorological phenomenon. It did not spin randomly, but maintained a deliberate shape, perfect cylinder of dust, ashes and wind that seemed to possess its own intelligence. At its center was not the expected void, but a presence so dense it bent the light around it. Job's four friends instinctively stepped back, their theological discourses evaporating before the manifest reality of the divine. Elihu, who moments before had spoken with such confidence, now trembled visibly, his previous words seeming like insignificant child's play. Only Job remained where he was, not out of courage, but from an exhaustion that transcended fear. His sore-covered body had no energy to flee, his wounded soul had no more room for terror. He simply looked at the whirlwind, his eyes once full of light, now clouded by pain fixed on the mystery unfolding. The voice from the center of the maelstrom did not follow the rules of human conversation, began with no greetings, offered no condolences, did not answer the specific questions Job had asked during weeks of suffering. Instead, it launched a question that reverberated in the foundations of existence itself. Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? The question demanded no answer. It was a declaration in disguise, a reminder of the infinite distance between creator and creature. Before anyone could form a coherent thought, the voice continued, now addressing Job directly, "Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, you shall answer me." And so began what could be called history's greatest interrogation, but one where the question does the asking. God had not come to answer Job, he had come to question him, not to explain suffering, but to reveal who he is. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone, while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? The questions continued, each more expansive than the last, each painting a picture of the universe that humbled any pretension of human understanding. God spoke not of theology, but of cosmic meteorology. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb, when I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, "This far you may come, and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt." The voice described snow, hail, rain, dew, eyes not as natural phenomena, but as personal creatures obeying divine commands. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle? The interrogation continued for entire chapters, spanning all creation. The constellations Pleiades, Orion, the Bear, were not merely star clusters, but works of art hung by divine hands. The lions in their dens, the hungry ravens, the mountain goats giving birth, the wild donkeys scorning the city, the wild ox refusing to serve man, the ostrich leaving her eggs on the ground, the horse with his strength in his neck, the locusts forming armies without a king, the hawk flying south, the eagle building her nest on the cliff. Each creature, each phenomenon, was presented not in scientific terms, but as an expression of God's creative wisdom and power. And amid this procession of wonders, the voice asked questions echoing with divine irony. Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. Job remained silent throughout this discourse, not because he lacked words, but because each new image, each new question, was systematically dismantling the entire structure of his questioning. He had asked why. God responded with who. He had demanded justice. God presented majesty. He had measured his suffering against his righteousness. God showed that both measures were immeasurably small before the vastness of creation. When the voice finally paused, the silence that followed was different from all previous silences. It was not the silence of wordless pain, nor the tense silence of waiting, but the silence of absolute reverence. Then God spoke again, but this time with a slightly different tone. Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him? And Job, who had spent weeks defending, arguing, questioning, finally found words, not words of defense nor of questioning, but of worshipful surrender. I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer twice. But I will say no more. But God was not finished. The whirlwind spun faster, and the voice resumed, this time focusing on two specific creatures that seemed the climax of his demonstration. Behemoth, likely the hippopotamus, and Leviathan, likely the crocodile. Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar, the sinews of its thighs are close-knit, its bones are tubes of bronze, its limbs like rods of iron. The description continued, vivid, almost passionate. Like an artist describing his masterpiece, it ranks first among the works of God, yet its maker can approach it with his sword. And then, Leviathan. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it keep begging you for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? Will it make an agreement with you for you to take it as your slave for life? Can you make a pet of it like a bird or put it on a leash for the young women in your house? The description of Leviathan was so detailed, so vivid, it transcended any known real creature, becoming almost mythological in its terrible splendor. Flames stream from its mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze and flames dart from its mouth. Strength resides in its neck. Dismay goes before it. The point was not biological, theological. If Job could not understand or control Earth's most formidable creatures, how dared he question the one who created them? If he could not face Leviathan, how could he contend with God? When the voice finally fell silent, the whirlwind began to slowly dissipate. The dust settled, the wind calmed. Job, who had remained seated throughout the divine discourse, now spoke with a transformed voice. I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. He paused, breathing deeply. Act. The words that followed came from a different place, not from the wounded man demanding explanations. Act from the worshiper acknowledging mystery. You asked, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. And then came the deepest declaration of his journey, the essence of what he had truly learned in the crucible of suffering. You said, listen now, and I will speak. I will question you, and you shall answer me. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. This was the true transformation, not the restoration of goods, but the transformation of vision. Before, Job knew God by tradition, by ritual, by hearsay. Now, after the incomprehensible suffering and the overwhelming discourse, he saw him, not physically, but with the eyes of a soul purified in the fire of inexplicable pain. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. His repentance was not for specific sins his friends had imagined, but for the very presumption of being able to comprehend divine ways of measuring God's justice with human rulers. The dialogue between God and Job had ended. The story had not. For then, the divine voice addressed the three friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, who had watched everything in silent terror. I am angry with you and your two friends, because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. The irony was profound. The men who came to comfort with ready-made theologies were wrong. The man who questioned, who debated, who challenged that man spoke what was right. Because his brutal honesty in his suffering was more pleasing to God than his friends, theologically correct but compassionately empty answers. So now take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and sacrifice a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer. Here was another reversal. The comforters needed the intercession of the comforted. The healthy needed the prayers of the sick. The theologically correct needed the forgiveness of the questioner. And Job, the man who had lost everything, prayed for his friends, and God accepted his prayer. There is no record of what he said in his intercession, but we can imagine they were different words from those his friends had spoken to him. Perhaps they were words of grace, of understanding, of forgiveness, fruits of a soul that had learned to see God not only in blessings, but in mysteries. After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. The restoration began, but in an interesting way. First came community. All his brothers and sisters and everyone who had known him before came and ate with him in his house. They comforted and consoled him over all the trouble the Lord had brought on him. And each one gave him a piece of silver and a gold ring. Job's isolation had ended. Community that perhaps avoided him in his suffering now returned. And then material goods were restored twofold: 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him again. And Job, who had learned the value of names on his journey, gave them significant names. The first he named Jema Madov, the second Keziah Cinnamon, and the third Karan Hapachhorn of cosmetic, possibly referring to a container for makeup. Scripture makes a remarkable observation about these daughters. Nowhere in all the land were there found women as beautiful as Job's daughters. And their father granted them an inheritance along with their brothers. In a culture where daughters rarely received inheritance, this act revealed a transformed Job, a man who, after seeing God, saw people differently too. Job lived after these events 140 years and saw his children and their children to the 4th generation. He died old and full of days. The story of Job does not end with answers, but with an encounter. Not with explanations, but with a presence. The suffering was not philosophically justified, but was relationally transcended. God did not tell Job about the heavenly dialogue with Satan, did not explain the pedagogical purpose of each loss, did not offer a satisfying theodicy. Instead, he revealed himself. And in this revelation, Job found something deeper than answers. He found God himself. And he discovered that knowing the one who holds the stars in place, who commands Leviathan, who establishes the sea's boundaries, knowing this God was enough. It was more than enough. Job's faith was not a faith that denies questions, but a faith that persists amid unanswered questions. It was not a faith based on rewards, but a faith that clings to God even when all rewards disappear. And in this faith, tested, proven, almost broken, but finally transformed, lies the eternal lesson of the man from Uz, that sometimes God does not remove the pain, but reveals himself in it, and that this revelation, when truly seen, is worth more than all the treasures that are lost or regained. Thus ends the saga of Job, not with a period, but with an echo that resonates through the centuries, reminding all suffering humanity that the Redeemer lives, and that in the end, we will see him. And that changes everything. The end. May God bless you. Thank you for getting this far. Subscribe to the channel and receive more videos like this.